Okay, so I was playing around with this today. All the samples from today, by the way, are available. Check the link in the description. But I think you should steal this idea from me and play around with it some. It's really cool. It's a really cool sound. It's kind of a layered approach to drum mixing, and I don't know. I just think you should check it out. So I have a couple different things going on here. I have the real basic um, implementation of plugins here. I have this Arouser LT, and it's just as a saturator. And then I have the Pultec by Apogee. And then what else do I have? That's all I'm using, those two plugins to create this effect. So the Arouser LT and the EQP 1A plugin by Apogee. So I have a couple really cool things going on here. Let's get into it. I'll show you kind of how I built this sound. So first up is, yeah, this is raw. Okay, cool. Here's the raw drum sound. Amazing. The R88A on overheads there. Just such a great sounding mic. So let me show you kind of what I have going on here. Drums, there we go. Okay, this isn't even on yet, okay? So this is all just raw tracks, okay? So these are the tracks you're gonna get if you wanna follow that link in my description. You can play around with this if you want, have some fun. Heck, you can sample these drum sounds. I don't really care, but I wanna just give these to you so you can hear what a kick sounds like raw, what a snare sounds like raw, okay? And then you can be like, oh, okay, like I'm either close to that or too far away from that. What should it sound like? And then where can it go in the mixing process? And just having some raw tracks to play around with can be extremely helpful. So take advantage of that. So here it is with just a little bit of mixing on kick. Okay, and did the kind of classic thing of you know, cut and then boost on the low end, added some highs. This always seems a little crazy because it's just the drums, but by the time you pile on a bunch of crap, you're gonna need that attack for the kick drum. And for the longest time, I didn't think the Audix D6 was anywhere near what should have been, you know, in a good kick mic, but I guess I'm saying that it's probably actually better than I thought because I always am missing that attack and I'm always adding it back in. So maybe I should get a D6. So that's the kick. Let me show you the compression here. It is a little tricky to get the compression right on kick. Let me show you here. Okay, so you kind of find the spot where you get clarity. That's how you set the attack. Then you find the spot where you get kind of your punch back, and it sounds like the noise between the hits is going and then coming back. And that's your kind of sweet spot for either too fast if you're hearing a lot of noise, or just about right if the noise between the notes of that kick drum starts to kind of go down. That means it's kind of pulling down the sustain, that weird sustain. It's giving you some punch. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time on just drum mixing necessarily, but I'll just quickly go over what I have on kick and snare here. Here's the snare. Okay, so that right there, that's what I was talking about with the kick drum, how it almost sounds like the noise between the notes just gets sucked down. It's not really what we want on snare. That to me sounds, that's like the telltale sign of like too slow of a compressor, right? But if we wanted to, that's a trick we can do, is we can control some of the noise between the notes. Now for this, I like to control it. I use it as a transient shaper. So I'm looking to the attack. I'm deciding how much attack do I want. Then I look to the release and I say, how much sustain do I want? So I could lop off the front, make it kind of a distorted sound, or I could keep some of the attack. And then with release, once again, deciding on the sustain. So I can basically subdue it, or I could release fast and make it come up real fast. So it releases before the drum's sounding, or before the drum is finished sustaining, I guess. And it makes the sustain sound louder. Okay, so I had this kind of about right in here. Yeah, so just a little bit high end boost there. And going on quickly, overheads, I just think I did a top end boost. Okay, so this is my mixed drum sound. I don't even know if this was on. Yeah, kind of get some sustain out of that. So I'm kind of going aggressive on the floor tom. It's kind of the way I like it. Okay, so pretty solid sound, you know? Like, this is a great sound. I mean, I'm using good drums in a decent sized room. You know, I'm doing kind of all the things that make it easy to get a good sound. Let's put it that way. I don't have any weird snare drum ringing. You know, I'm using an Evans SD Dry. I'm using actually big drumsticks, so it gives a very heavy sound, very commanding sound. A lot of good things. ISA, 828 Focusrite preamps. So yeah, a lot of great tone off the bat. But this, you know, this drum bus idea is, I don't know, I've been playing around with it all day, and I think it's worth checking out. You could steal it. It's probably not original, but hey, it was just something I was doing. So so it starts off with, and you can do it both ways. Here in Studio One, you have what's called a splitter, and you can actually split and make a dry wet of different effects. And so the Arouser full version actually has a dry wet. This is the LT. You know, I just wanted to get kind of used to this tool, but I did the splitter and I split off, and I'm just using this as a saturator, basically. Check this out. So that sounds pretty nasty. And then we're going to add some bass. Crank up the bass. You know, this reminds me actually of a plugin. Let's see here. What is it called? It's by Air Windows, and it's like Speaka Destroya or something. Let me see here. I actually know it's in the tape 564 or whatever that is. Yeah, this fatter knob. This thing is so cool. So I wasn't even planning on showing this, but I got to try this. This is I think appropriate for the sound. Okay, I took this off, obviously. Yeah, it's actually not overdriving like I thought. I don't know if it's just not enough gain going in this thing or what. So we'll just get rid of that for now. We'll just stick with what I have. But this is a free plugin. This sounds amazing, actually. If you want a free or a crowdfunded, I really should say, a crowdfunded plugin that sounds great. The Air Windows stuff is amazing for saturation. It is great stuff. There's just a very complex sounding saturation. The 2-tape 564 is kind of one of my favorites. But in this situation, I went with the Arouser LT 1:1 ratio, used it just as a saturator, added some bass, added some treble. Actually, here I just added some low end, but I was experimenting with adding some high end to kind of a New York compression kind of thing where you kind of boost the lows and highs. But yeah, let's hear this again. Cool. Now, the hardest thing about blending stuff, especially if you're not used to blending wet dry, uh, I guess I'll speak in terms of faders. So if you have like a fader, in this situation we have 2 faders, and so I would say if your original sound is, say, at unity gain, so 0, you start to hear the parallel processing at about -20. About -15, it seems really obvious, and -10, it's very obvious. And then it's obviously more volume too. So you have to kind of prep your ears to start to hear it at about -20. At least that's what I've learned kind of over the years, playing around with it is, listen. What I do is I go to unity gain, but I'll go to like -6. And I'll just kind of shoot for like -6, -6 if I want a 50-50 ratio. But a lot of times, if I'm just sneaking it in real subtle, I'll go to unity gain and I'll just sneak it into like -20. You hear it getting louder there? So it's obviously doing something. It's obviously in there. It's this whole thing where you can't solo it, right? So you're kind of blending it in there, and it's hard to know, is it enough? Is it not enough? But when you take it out, if you notice, oh, it sounds kind of empty. Well, there you go. That's your sign. So yeah, -20 is about my threshold for being able to hear it. I know some engineers, like Pensado, like he'll be doing a video on reverb, and I'm just like, I can't even hear it. Like, crank it up a little bit because I can't even hear what he's talking about. So I don't know if it's maybe his room is just perfect or whatever, but I kind of need to crank stuff, see what it's doing, and then tuck it back in the mix. At least that's just me. As you develop, you kind of know what to listen for, and okay, yeah, I hear it in there. Okay, but I really need to kind of crank it, see what it's doing, and then tuck it back in. So here I'm just trying to kind of massage the strength and the muscle of the drums. Okay, this whole stage here, which is saturation and kind of a scooped sound, and so yeah, unity gain about, and then sneaking it in I don't know, maybe negative 15. Let's try that. You know what? Let's do the opposite. Let's go unity gain here. Let's just see what the levels are. Okay, so it's actually a little bit louder on the saturation side. I don't know. I'll do it about -9 or so. By the way, this is actually inspired by the 5020 stereo FET limiter. So I was kind of thinking, if I were to try to make that with plugins, that effect, I mean, how would I exactly do it? And I kind of thought, well, maybe I'll do some like little bit of saturation. It doesn't really do saturation necessarily, but it has this really cool like thickening thing that it does. So yeah, we're just trying to sneak it in, right? We're trying to make it seem like our drums are just this amazing force, and they don't seem like there's something on them, but there's definitely something on them that it's like, wow, they just sound huge. Okay, so I don't know where to set this exactly, but let's move on to the part 2. And this is a kind of a rubber band, I'll call it, compressor, a long release, and it kind of creates like this sucking effect that it just seems like the sustain in the room. It almost becomes like a solid form that you can actually, take and stretch the sound flying around the room, and it almost creates this really cool, kind of palpable thickness in the room. It's hard to describe. It's not slamming room mics, okay? It's not that type of sound. It's a slower sound that just sounds like the vibe in the room is pretty bad. Like somebody's pissed off and there's something not right. Let's get out of here. He's not in a good mood. Let's go. We'll come back later. It's that kind of vibe, okay? We're creating this big muscular sound, okay? Okay. Let's give it a shot. Huh. Doesn't seem like it's doing a whole lot, does it? Yeah, okay. So you can kind of hear what I'm talking about. It's like the space between the notes. Okay. It's not as aggressive as a fast release. Okay. And this is weird. I mean, I've never done really a slow release like this. But again, I was inspired by a piece of hardware and I'm trying to get that sound. So it's kind of a cool rabbit trail to go down. So check this out. Okay, that's the normal approach, right? If you think of like drum room mics, it's like, yeah, slam it. But yeah, this is not what I'm after. And that's cool, but that'll make the cymbals really loud. And I mean, maybe I'm making them loud right now too. Yeah, it really needs to be a kind of a limiter, which is anything over 10 to 1. So I'm trying to kind of glue the notes together, okay? Like I'm literally trying to do quarter notes between here and when it returns there. And I don't know, that's just what the 50/20 gives me is it seems like there's this palpable thickness that it's getting out of the room. And it's really mean, it's really nasty, it's angry, it's throwing chairs and tables. I don't know how it does it. It's one of the coolest sounding compressors, but I think I got close. Okay, this is definitely cool. Let's see how it goes kind of in the mix here. Yeah. Like, let me just make sure I'm volume matched here. Yeah, so I can use this VU meter right here and actually use it to find the average volume. It's going to hopefully ignore the transients and give me the average. I can also use this durometer here and finding the more lower steady line. That's kind of like a VU meter as well. So I'm using that to level match, and that's just a good reference. Anytime I'm level matching, I'm not going to rely necessarily on my ears because there's a lot of frequency play and stuff going on that can be deceiving. So I've learned just to use the VU meter for that, and it's been awesome because I could tell, like, oh wow, those toms are really loud because the VU meter just goes nuts when I hit the toms. And I realized that, like, there's not that much low end because I was cranking the toms and there was a balancing issue of the frequencies, I guess. So it kind of exposed something cool, like even right before I started filming this video. But yeah, that's how I'm level matching, is I use the VU meter, and it's super helpful. That's just the Ward Beck extended range VU meter that I got for like $100. Okay, so back to the plugin kind of schematic here. So yeah, I have this level matched. So now if we do -6 and -6, then we should have equal parts. And we should have the same volume as well. Yep, sure enough. So, right there, if you ever want to kind of check this stuff, create a synthesizer or a sine wave tone generator and just duplicate the track and watch your master volume go up. And you'll see, oh look, 6 dB, 6 dB every time you add something. And so yeah, man, that was way back in the day when I was doing a lot of Ableton stuff and kind of doing some producing and electronic music and all that. But that trick has really stuck with me over the years, because when I want to blend something like in this, I can just take it down by 6 and get pretty much the same volume as long as I've done everything correctly. Okay, so maybe not 50-50. I want to kind of sneak this in. Like, I don't want to, maybe I don't want the band to know that I did this, right? It's like, man, my drums are just that good. Like, they just sound better at my studio. So it's like, you can kind of sneak this processing in very subtly just to add a little bit of bigness. Yeah, yeah. Maybe one day I'll say it's a big console sound, or that's the sound of tape. When we record a tape, we get this big sound. Now, we can just sneak it in. We can create it with layers. We're massaging. Okay, I'm joking, but what we're doing is we're massaging different layers of subtlety, right? And what's cool is the kick drum, it's not so big on its own necessarily, but when it adds to other things and then we process more and more and more, it just gets out of control. Like some of the low end just, has to go away because there's so much thickness and low end that we have to reduce some of it. And that's a good place to be when we have to reduce some of the low end. And we know that our drums are in phase. We're not having issues where they're subtracting and fighting one another. These are the good expectations that we have as we go through the process. It's amazing how far you can push things, Like you don't even hear the saturation until you really push it up there because now it's kind of layered in. Okay, so we have this. I forget, why did I have this in here? I think it was to level match, but now that I have this stuff set, I'm not going to do that. So, yeah, basically anytime you need to really push something a certain way, I'll put in like a little utility plugin that'll either trim up the volume, trim down the volume. That's totally cool. Definitely think of plugins as guitar pedals. There is gain staging, and so I'll trim them up, I'll trim them down. Bass Mint, for example, that plugin I was learning this past week, just kind of playing around with it, and it seemed like it wanted to put out a lot more than what I wanted to get the effect that I had going. I needed to trim it down. So that's just an example of like sometimes, I don't know, sometimes it just you want to push out of a plugin, and yeah, you can just trim it down using a utility. So yeah, this is the second stage. So stage 1, saturation, bass boost, treble boost. Stage 2, which is kind of that glue, that sucking glue compression. And then, what did I do here? Nothing. Okay. So then we have this. And this was really just to add in some clarity. So a little bit more attack out of the drums. And this is over everything. This is not a split kind of thing, 50-50. This is over, over the whole mix. By the way, about 5 minutes ago, before I started filming, I figured out that if you hold shift, it'll do that, where it'll do in and out at the same time. Can't say that it's going to be like equal volume, but it is kind of a quick, a quick little thing. Okay, so, these numbers really don't mean a whole lot. I'm really using my ears, and if you can't hear compression, what you really need to do is turn it down. And if you have a mix, you can also just bury what you're working on. You can just bury it in the mix. Have guitars, have everything, have synths, whatever style of music you're working on. Electronic music might be hard to hear because there's not really dynamics in a synth necessarily. In like a drum loop, there's variations, and like a drum part, there's variations between kick and snare and claps, but electronic music is going to be harder to hear. It's much easier in like a vocal and a drum track and a guitar track. It's just much easier to hear. And if you can't hear it in general, you turn down the volume or you bury it in the track. Okay. So yeah, let me show you that real quick. Okay, so at this setting, with this gain setting going in, it seems to be unhappy if I go any faster than this. Okay? Because we start to lose the attack. Yep, and it's gone. And it's back. So this is a substitute for EQ. If you're reaching for EQ as a first thing, maybe consider compression instead. Go there first, because we got clarity back. We didn't have to introduce phase shift or any weirdness. So we got our clarity back. This goes for vocal. If you want some sibilance, slower that attack time, right? We want some clarity in the drums, we can slow down the attack time. We get clarity, we get the snap back. It's a transient shaper, but it's also kind of a tone tool in that some of the frequencies are kind of time dependent, and they're kind of, if the timing is off, then you lose the high end because we're not hearing the beginning of the note, for example. So it's interesting because it's not that compression is just to do with timing. It also can affect the tone, because some of the tone is, the high end of a kick drum is going to be at the beginning of the hit, right? If you lose the beginning of the hit, then there's no high end. It doesn't mean that you should take EQ and slam the high end to get it back. No, go back to the compressor that you added and readjust that to get it back. You see? So, I was talking to a friend, and I was kind of explaining to him, like, you really need to just stick with 3 plugins, okay? That's it, 3 plugins. And do a couple hours of mixing with just 3 plugins, because it's so easy to go through and to fix something that could have just been, maybe a bad choice earlier. And so if you minimize your plugin use and use what you have, one, you really learn it, but two, you find ways to fix the issues. And then they're not even issues. You have to add an additional, 8 or 9, plugins per track. I mean, it just gets ridiculous. And, I was looking at a different friend's session, and it was like multi-band compression, and it's like, why is all this stuff on here? Like, these really complicated plugins, these issues were almost created or even made worse by settings of compression, right? If you just learn compression really well and you learn what it can do, you don't have to use crazy fancy plugins, because the issue is not that you need the fancy plugin, it's that you got to get the right settings. You can't take beef jerky and make it back into a steak, okay? It's just not possible. There's only so much you can do. So you have to do things in order. And if you don't want beef jerky, then it takes some knowledge upstream to say, okay, I'm going to be going this direction with it. So, let's make these choices. So yeah, multi-band compression on, just on every track, and just crazy things like really complicated plugins and things. There's so much that can be done with just the basics, okay, the fundamentals. Okay, so let's see here. So we have this. We are listening quietly. Okay, so I'm just going to very gently use this and just subtly use it to just add in some clarity to the drums. So here it is without. You hear the difference? 1 to 2 dB, right? It's not that, I'm doing the YouTube tutorial thing where you can barely hear the effect, and the guy's like, oh, you hear that? And it's like, I can't hear it. No, I think you could hear it, okay? But it goes back to this idea that we're just subtly adding moves at a time. We can crank it up to see what it's doing, but think of it as just subtle moves at a time, okay? Don't do it all at once, okay? Just think of it as subtle moves. We have drum bus with this whole process, and then we have stereo bus, you know, and we have other things in the mix too. Okay. Yeah, whatever. I mean, this could work, could not work. Um, it's kind of hard to know. I'm just kind of goofing off with this drum track right now. But let me know if you have any questions on this technique. Again, it was just kind of a layered approach. It's just something I've just been playing around with. I figured I'd just kind of share it with you. Layered approach of saturation, and then some kind of like sucking compression, and then some final compression just to kind of, get back some snap. We kind of destroyed a lot of the clarity with that saturation. We added fatness, right? But then we're kind of tightening it up again, okay? At that very final stage, that final compressor. So, yeah, let me know what you think of this. Be hanging out in the comments below.